Hello everyone, and welcome to this detailed Ketron tutorial. Today we're going to spend a lot of time talking to you in depth about the new Ketron Audia, and also spend a lot of time talking about the Ajamsonic version of this keyboard, which is actually the elite version of the Ketron Audia. We're going to go into more details about this down the road. Right now, we want to discuss pretty much what this amazing workstation from Ketron can do. First and foremost, Ketron is known for having the best natural sounds out there. Now, in the Ajamsonic version of this keyboard, we've taken it a notch higher. We've actually given you some of the greatest synthesized voices you can find out in the market today. Not only that, we've also included a very robust drum package, over 200 live audio drums that actually come with this keyboard. But then again, like I said before, we're going to get into more depth about the Ajamsonic keyboard down the line. As you can see, the Audia comes in various versions. You have the flagship, which is the Audia keyboard itself, which is 76-note keyboard. You also have over here to my left the Audia 4, which is actually a module version of this keyboard. And this version benefits people like the accordion MIDI players, the guitar MIDI players, or those of you who want like an 88-note keyboard or 88-note action keyboard, but you want to have those sounds, those great sounds from Ketron. So the module has pretty much everything that the keyboard has, just as you can see without the keys. It's pretty much a very lightweight instrument, and for those of you who have problems with traveling, especially nowadays with the airlines hacking the prices up for transporting luggages, this might just be your solution after all. Behind me we have the Audia 5. Now the Audia 5 also is another Audia product, of course. It's pretty much the same as the Audia, just two things that are a little bit different about this keyboard. It's got 61 keys, well, make it three things. One, it's got 61 keys. Two, rather than having the pitch and the modulation wheel separate on the top left-hand corner, it's got them at the bottom left-hand corner. And three, the Audia 5 doesn't have the digital SPDF in and out. Apart from that, everything else comes standard. The Ajamsonic version of this keyboard can be applied to existing customers who have an Audia, or you can also purchase the Ajamsonic keyboard already built for you. And that can apply, well, that does apply to either the Audia 5, the regular 76-key Audia, or the Audia 4. So let's talk now about the Audia and help you guys with some navigation as we talk about the keyboard. Display and panel layout. Audia's panel is broken down into about 8 major areas. I'm going to go through them one after the other. First and foremost, at the center of your keyboard, you have your screen, your main display. Your screen actually displays the current status of the Audia keyboard. To the left and right of the screen, you have your selection buttons, F1 through F5 and F6 through F10. And these buttons are used to select information or to input data into the keyboard. On the bottom of the screen, you have your user controls or user buttons, user 1 through user 5 and 6 through 10. The top right-hand corner is made up of the voice group buttons right here. These are 16 buttons which are actually your voice groups. All the Audia's voices, about over 380 of them, or if you have the Ajamsonic, it's over 480 voices, reside in these categories right here. Right next to your voices, you have your style groups right here. Right here, all your drum parts and your styles reside and can be accessed. Below that, in this section over here, is your player section. And your player section is where your performances of your MP3s, your WAV, and your MIDI files, together with the corresponding controls. Below the screen, you have the arranger conductor. And this is where some of the magic actually occurs. The arranger conductor comprises of the different parts that are used to control the arranger when you're performing, especially for real time. The player control functions are located at the top left-hand section of the keyboard, and these are used to control separate functions of the keyboard in real time. Below that, you have your arranger volume controls and voice control buttons, which are slider buttons, which are right here on the bottom left section. And these are used to control the different arranger parts. Power on and display. What should you expect when you turn on Audia? Normally, with the regular standard Audia, when you power the machine up, it takes about maybe 25 to 30 seconds to boot up. And what Audia does is it loads in the existing software or the existing operating system into the machine before it's ready to play. With the Ajamsonic version, this boot up time is a little bit longer, say maybe 45 seconds. The reason being that in the Ajamsonic version of this keyboard, there are so many new voices and so many new audio drums, and also some functions that need to be loaded up and implemented prior to the keyboard being used. With over 2 gigabytes worth of new data, it needs some time to load this stuff up. Also, if you create MSPs or multi-samples on your Audia, it'll also increase the length of the boot up time, especially if these multi-samples are tied to your styles. So right now we have on our screen, let's talk about our screen for a second. When you turn the machine on, this is what your screen should look like. At the way top corner of your screen, you have the count bar, which counts as you perform. So you can see that right there. It gives you your actual count when you're performing with the style of the machine. Right next to that is your BPM, beats per minute, which is your tempo, tells you how fast you're performing. Right next to that is your transposer. When you transpose the keyboard, your transpose value is displayed at the top of the screen. Right next to that is your split point. When you try to split the keyboard by pressing down the split and holding it down and pressing the key for your new split point, your split point is displayed right at the top right-hand corner of the screen. On the far right-hand corner is your octave. When you change the octave of the keyboard, especially though right now you only have 76 keys, so a traditional pianist, for example, might want to access other sounds and other voices in a different range, either above or below the current octave setting. And you can do that by pressing the octave button, and its corresponding value is displayed in the top right-hand corner of the screen. Over here in the left section, we have the style box. And what is that style box telling us? First of all, it says style, which means it's coming, this is the style section, the style box. Next to that in parentheses, it says ballad, which corresponds to where the current style is taken from, or where the current style resides in. Next to that, you have the number, which is the volume of the style. And that's controlled by the style master volume right here. So that controls your style volume, and it's displayed in that corner of the screen. Below in bigger font is the name of the style. When you select a style in the style category, for an example, I went to ballad. If I select pop ballad right now, as soon as that loads up, it's displayed over there in the top right-hand corner of the screen. And below that, you see arranger A. That tells you what the current arrangement setting is, A, B, C, or D. In the right-hand corner, you have your voice box. And the voice box tells you pertinent information regarding the voices. You see right there, it says right, which is your right-hand lead voice. In parentheses, it tells you, in this example, or in this case, piano. The current voice that is loaded right now, ready to play, comes from the piano category. If you pick another category, let's say you went into the organ, and you picked the sound in the organ, guess what? That sound now gets displayed in that box. Again, you now see that this particular sound comes from the organ category. And this is a preset voice because you have different types of voices. Over here, you have the registration box. And that is your song setting or registration box. What that does, it tells you what your current song status is. So if you load a registration or you load a song setting, whatever setting was loaded will be displayed in that little box. Right next to that is your second voice box, and that tells you what second voice is currently being used. The second voice is an additional voice that is directly tied to or linked to your lead voice, which is in the top right-hand corner. For the second voice, again, you have its octave value. You also have its volume, which can be controlled by the second voice slider right here. And of course, you have the name in dark blue of the second voice. Middle left section, you have over here, it says MIDI. And this box is your player box, or your player control area. This tells you the current song that is being queued to play. And of course, we've got a couple of dashes because in this case, we haven't picked any song as of yet. This box can be used to display either your MIDI or your WAV or your MP3, depending on what the selection is. So if you go in for an example and you press WAV and you select a WAV song to play, let's say in this case, we're going to say a jam WAV, for example, and you come back into your main display will show you what sound you have selected or you've played. Your right hand, right to the right of that is going to be your left voice. The Audea is capable of playing a separate voice on the right hand and a separate voice on the left hand, right and left of the selected split point. Again, for the left voice, it has its octave value. It also has its volume value, which all the way up is at 63, which is the maximum. And in dark blue, the actual voice has been assigned to the left hand. In the bottom left-hand corner, not the way bottom, but not the bottom, but somehow close to the bottom, you have your volume controls, which tells you the current status of the arranger. That's the volume for the drums, 0 through 63, the volume for the bass, the volume for the chords, and the volume for the lower section. To the right of that, you have the chord display section, and that tells you what chords are currently being played on the arranger section, which is to the left. If you are in pianist mode, which means that the pianist button is lit, and in this particular scenario, the entire the entire keyboard now acts with one voice. You can play along and actually watch the particular chords displayed on the screen in that corner. There's a little button there on the right-hand side that says lyric, which is actually pointing to or pointing at F10. What that does is, if you're playing a MIDI file, or you're playing a WAV, or you're playing an MP3, and you press F10, the actual lyrics associated with that file will be displayed on the right-hand side of the screen. In this case, it's blank because we don't have any MIDI files that we've queued in yet for this purpose. Pressing F10 once more returns you to your default screen. On the bottom of the screen right here, where you see F1, fill 1, fill 2, fill 3, fill 4, this is actually controlled by these, we'll call them soft buttons. Soft because the value of these buttons can change at any time depending on what you program them to be. In this case, for the default, user 1 has been assigned fill 1, user 2 has been assigned fill 2, user 3 fill 3, user 4 fill 4, and user 5 key start. You also have your back and forward buttons, which are used to manage or to control this bottom section of the page from the main page. These buttons also work differently depending on what screen you're in. If I go to forward, for example, I now see the assignment of user 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, which is break 1, 2, 3, and 4, and right boost. If I go back, I can see the previous assignment to user 1, user 2, user 3, user 4, and user 5. Now, we've just discussed briefly about these programmable buttons, but how do you, the user, program these programmable buttons? And how do you also program the user slider? These 5 buttons on the bottom of your screen and this particular user slider button over here can be programmed by you. It's pretty easy. To assign these buttons to any of the over 50 or 60 different functions found in Audea, simply press the user assignable button over here. That brings you to this particular screen. Now, you can see on the left, F1 through F5, you have user tab preset 1, user tab preset 2, user tab preset 3, user tab preset 4, and preset 5. You have 5 locations where you can actually program your own settings for these buttons over here to do what you want them to do. Now, you notice the screen went back to the main display. That's because in 20 seconds, I didn't do anything. When you go into some of these menus or some of these screens, Audia is waiting for an input. If you don't do anything in about 20 seconds or so, the screen will go back to the default page or to the previous page that you came from. So how do we program these? First of all, you select the user setting that you want to program. In this case, we're going to program our user setting number 1, which is the preset number 1, assigned to F1. User assignable is flashing. So you now press the edit button, and this is going to be a very useful tool because this button always varies depending on what menu you're in. For example, if you're in the voice menu and you press edit, you're going to edit a voice. If you're in the style menu and you press edit, you're going to edit a style, and so on and so forth. But for this case, we are in the user assignable menu and we pressed edit, and we're now brought to this page. F1 through F5 tells you the current, in other words, tab 1, tab 2, 3, 4, and 5 is referring to these 5 buttons on the bottom of the screen right now. And the middle section of the screen tells you the different functions you can assign to these buttons. So for an example, in this particular case, user 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have been assigned to fill to end, drum and bass, autofill, end and stop, and drum and bass again. If I want to assign user 1, this guy right here, I want to assign him a particular function, what do? I scroll with my data wheel through the different functions in the middle of the screen until I get to the function I would like to assign, in this case autofill. I want to assign autofill to user 1. Once I highlight it, I simply press the corresponding F1 button in this case, and you see the bottom of the screen right there? Autofill has been assigned to user 1. How do I know it's user 1 versus user 2? Because it says page 1. Page 1, page 1, page 1, page 1. Remember I told you before, the back and forward goes to change the pages of these between user 1 through 5 and user 6 through 10. If I press the 4 button, watch what happens. The left side of the screen, all your buttons are now saying page 2. So now you're dealing with user 6 through user 10. Let's go back and do another example again. I want to now assign user number 2, let's say start and stop. So in other words, I want to be able to press this button when I'm playing my arranger and have the arranger start or stop. What do? I simply scroll through until I can see start and stop. And again, these are not arranged in any particular order. It's just a matter of going through. Style start, there we go. Dry and stop, and I'm looking for my start, which I think I just passed. Right there. Style stop in this case. And which of the user buttons do I want to assign style stop to? Is it user 1? If yes, you want to press F1. Is it user 2? I want to press F2. Is it user 3? I want to press F3. In my case, I want to assign this to, let's say, user 4. Or, yeah, let's just say user 4. So I'm going to press tab number 4. And now you can see style start, style stop has been assigned to my user 4. I want to assign dry on stop, let's say, to my user number 5. I'm going to press F5 to assign to that one. And when I'm done with everything, I press F10, which is save. And that saves my user settings. To get back out, I'm going to press the exit button, and that's going to take me out into my voice selection group. Now, I'm going to get back in again to my user assignable, and I'm going to show you another nice little trick. Well, guess what? We just did the setting now for user tab number 1. You can repeat the same thing for number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, each of these, like we noticed, in the first case, you could program 10 different functions. That's 10 into the user number 1 section. 10 more can be programmed into number 2. 10 more into number 3, 10 more into number 4, and 10 more into number 5. So technically speaking, you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 separate functions that can be assigned to the user buttons on the bottom and recalled instantly. On the right side of the display, the right column shows you the different functions that can be assigned to the user slider button over here. Pretty interesting, huh? Default is the PFL, which is a pre-fader listen. This function allows you to, while playing a song on the player section, pre-listen to or listen to another song in advance which was not being played on the output. So in other words, this function allows you to be your own DJ. While a song is playing, you can listen in your headphone queue and cue in another song before having that song perform or having that song go out to the world or to the public. My audio keeps on returning to the main screen because I'm not doing anything. I'm talking and talking and talking. Okay. Now, the second function over here is wave filter. If I go into wave filter, this now becomes assigned to the wave filter function. And you see a small arrow next to that. It means that there's more behind this. Press F7 again, right level reverb. So now this slider has become the adjuster for the right level reverb. Press the arrow again, it says micro level reverb. This slider has now been assigned to adjust the microphone, sorry, the reverb level of the microphone. Press F7 again, back to the wave filter. So you have about 3 functions there that can be assigned to this. Or go to F8 and the chord 1 wah-wah, the wah-wah value of the chord 1 is now assigned to user. Press it again, user is now chord 2 wah-wah value is assigned to this. Press it again, it's chord 3, chord 4, and chord 5, or the bass, or the chords if you want to, or all the entire style if you want to control the wah-wah with this particular button right here, or the right-hand side, which is the lead voices. Or you can now press F9, and this slider controls the portamento time value between 0 when it's on the bottom and 63 on the top. Or you can assign this to the chord cutoff, which means that this particular button will now control the volume of, let's say in this case, just chord 5, which is your live guitar, or bass. I can control this with just a bass, but why would you want to do that when you already have a bass dedicated button right there? All chords cutoff, which will now operate as your chord volume over here. This chord volume controls the volume of all the entire chords. This volume can also be used to do the entire style, which will be very similar to the master style right here. Or the right cutoff, just the right hand lead voices, which will be again identical to the right voice control over here. Or the chord 1, if you want to just do the volume of just chord 1, you can assign that to this button as well too. Or chord 2, or chord 3, or chord 4, or back in chord 5 again. So that is your user assignable. Now, this is the interesting thing. If this button is off, these functions return to the default factory, as you can see right now, fill in 1, fill in 2, 3, 4, 5, or break 1, break 2, break 3, break 4, break 5, and your right boost. The minute you want to activate these to be your user settings, together with this, you simply press the user assignable button, and that's it. Now, these are doing what you had programmed them to do. And that's pretty much it for the user assignable programmable function. Now I'm going to discuss the rear panel that tells you exactly how Audia interfaces with the outside world. On the left corner right here we have the power switch. And what the power switch actually does, it turns the machine on and off, right back here. Right next to that we have the power cable input. And this allows you to plug the Audia either to a 240 volts, which can be used in foreign countries like, say, in Africa or Europe, continent, sorry. Or you can plug this in the United States with 110 volts. Either way, it's going to recognize the voltage of the country you're in automatically. So Audia runs on 210, 120, 120, or 140 volts. Back here we have the video output, and the video output is a very interesting connector. This allows you to connect Audia to an external screen. It could be a flat screen, or it could be a a computer monitor. What that does is, inside the Audia, you have 2 options. You can either send out a mirror image of the screen, which means that whatever information is shown on the screen at a given time will also be projected onto that external device, or you can select a mode in here, in the video mode, which we'll discuss in depth later on, which allows you to send out just the lyrics of MIDI files or WAV files or MP3s, or even your own lyrics that you can put into the hard drive of the audio. Right next to that, we have the very interesting USB device connector. And this USB device connector allows you to do two things. It can either be set in MIDI mode, which allows the audio to communicate with external devices via USB MIDI, or this connector can be set into data mode, which allows the audio to connect with computers using a standard USB cable. Right next to that, you have this section over here that shows you 4 MIDI connectors. You can see the audio is pretty sophisticated indeed. And these MIDI connections are as thus. The first one is the through connection, and that MIDI through, whatever comes into the MIDI input jack goes right out in the through, unaltered and untouched. Next to that, you have the MIDI out, which sends the MIDI information out of the audio to an external MIDI device. And the next two are pretty interesting. You have two inputs, two MIDI inputs, and I'm going to explain them to you one by one. The first one is the in-to keyboard, and that is where you would connect a controller device, let's say, especially with the Audio 4. If you had a keyboard or you have a MIDI accordion, whatever you want to use to control the audio, especially to control the arrangement section of the audio, that device goes into the MIDI in2. The MIDI in1 is actually a MIDI in1 GM port. And what that does is if you have an external sequencer, especially if you're running software like Cubase or Cakewalk, and you want to use the sound engine of the audio, that is exactly where you would plug that device into. Right next to that, we have the foot switch. And what the foot switch does is it actually allows you to connect our optional FS6 or FS13 foot switch. As you can see, I have a FS6 before me here. And what does this guy do? Well, there's so many functions in the audio. What you want to do is you want to just play, right? Just have fun and play the machine. So rather than mess around with pushing buttons and typing as if you were at work, purchase one of these. And you can assign these pedals to do whatever, are assignable. For an example, you can assign this to be your start-stop. You can assign that to be your voice up, voice down. You could assign this to turn on and off your vocalizer. You could assign that to change your tempo, whatever you want. And again, we shall discuss this in more detail as we go on with this. Next to the foot switch, we have the volume pedal. And what the volume pedal does is it allows you to connect an external volume pedal to the audio. The volume pedal can be used to control the entire machine, or it can be programmed to control just your right lead hand, or just an MP3, or just a WAV, or just a MIDI file volume. So it depends on you. You can actually program your volume pedal to do one or the other. Right next to that, we have the sustain pedal. And the sustain pedal allows you to connect an external sustain pedal to the machine, especially if you're a pianist. That's something you definitely want to have. And we move along here to the line in, left and right line in RCA jacks. And these are actually used to connect an external device like a CD player or an MP3 player, maybe even an iPod or so that has this kind of connectors. And that allows you to play music that is not available on your audio. Your audio comes with a 80 gigabyte hard drive, and for all purposes, actually, you can download and copy all your stuff into your audio directly and just play from the audio. But for those of you who want to have external devices playing through your machine, that jack is out there for you. We also have the SPDF in and out, the digital in and out, which is available on the audio only. These jacks are not available on the Audio 4 nor the Audio 5. And next to that, we have the interesting aux out, which are our outputs. You have 4 auxiliary outputs, which you can program the audio to send different things out of these outputs. For example, you can have the drums coming out of one of the outputs. You can have the bass coming out of another output. You can have the live guitars coming out of another one, And same applies to the left and right outputs, which follow that one as well, too. And over here, we have the 2 microphone inputs, and each of those 2 have a gain knob associated with them. And right next to them, the last one but not the least, is the headphone jack, which can be used, of course, to connect headphones. It can also be used to send out a metronome click to a drummer. In other words, you can specify to have a click track coming out of this particular jack and the rest of the sounds coming out of the other jack. So that's your back layout for your audio, equivalent Audio 5 or Audio 4. Ketron is well renowned for their best natural sounds and best natural voices. And this is a tradition that we don't take very lightly. The top priority of every keyboard should be your sound, no matter how beautiful the keyboard looks. If it doesn't sound right, the chances are you're not going to be happy with it. When you first turn on your Audia, it pretty much powers on to the arranger mode. And what's the arranger mode? The arranger mode is there's a split point on the keyboard, whereas the voices to the right of the split are going to be your piano, and the voices to the left of the split will be voices that are used by the chord. To remove this split point altogether, so you can have one voice or one instrument through the entire piano range, simply press the pianist button, which is located in the top left section over there, under the play control. With the pianist button now pressed and lit, your entire keyboard now has one voice. To access a voice on the piano, it's pretty simple. Sorry, to access a voice on the keyboard is pretty simple. Pretty much all you have to do is to go into any of your 16 family groups over here, the top right hand corner of the keyboard, and let's say in our case you want to play piano, you press piano, and your screen is going to display the pianos that are in the keyboard. To go to the next page, you just have to press the piano button once more, and that goes from page 1 to page 2. And you can see in the display, bottom red, it says preset selection, page 2 or page 1. Now to actually pick or select the actual voice you're interested in, piano, upright, romantic, simply use the F1 through F10 buttons to make that selection. As you can see, the audio is designed such that there's very little time spent in searching for things, very little time spent digging into menus. All you have to do is simply click, maximum maybe 2 buttons away, and you should be into what you're looking for. There are, as I said before, over 400 voices in Audia, or over 500 voices in the Ajamsonic Audia. And these are all divided into these particular groups over here. Preset voices, main lead voices. Now I'm going to go through these voices, a couple of voices on the Audia, just to give you a general idea of how good this arranger workstation sounds like. Let's go into the piano category for an example. I'm going to press piano, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to press my concert grand, which is my grand piano on my Audia. Let's take a listen to how this piano actually sounds. You will notice that this actually does sound like a real grand piano, right? That's because the folks at Ketron and the folks at Ajamsonic have taken a lot of time to make sure that the true natural feeling of the instrument is captured. Now, anyone could just go out there and put a microphone into a piano and record a piano, or record samples and put the layers into the keyboard, but is that really going to capture the true character of the instrument? That's what the folks at Ketron shine at. How do you get that sound to sound like a piano, so that when you close your eyes and you play this beautiful piece, all you can hear is a piano. Let's try the romantic grand piano simply by pressing F6. Let's try listening to some of the electric piano voices. Those voices are found in the electric piano group right there. Some of the interesting voices to consider would be something like the electric piano, which is the FM layered. That's going to be on page 2. So how do I get to that voice? I can either press the electric piano button once again, or I can use the left and right data arrow buttons right here to go to the next page. Aha! FM layered is associated with F6, so what do? I simply press F6, and there we go. Let's try out some of the organ voices for an example. Classic B3. Go into the organ category. Right there is classic B3. Now let's go to the accordion section. Of course, if the Ketron keyboard was built by Italians, this is the one section they're not going to mess with. Let's go into the bass category and play around with some very nice bass sounds. Now, one of the things you're going to figure out about, or you're going to notice about the Audia is, when it comes to drum and to bass, well, listen for yourself. What you're listening to, which is why your screen looks a little bit crazy right now, is some of the unique sounds found in the Ajamsonic version of the Audia. Second voice, adding another voice to your lead voice. Now, what we just went through for the most part were just some of the main voices, which we call the lead voices on the Audia. You can instantly add a second voice by pressing the second voice button over here. What that does is it adds a second voice to your lead voice. So for an example, if we have the piano on right now, and we press the second voice button, we can instantly add dark ensemble string sounds to that piano. This is actually true for all your lead voices. They all have second voices assigned to them. It's a very nice feature for layering or adding more voices to your actual lead voice. Now in Audia, you can actually add a third voice, or in some cases, even a fourth voice as well. And that's going to be discussed in the actual program area. The programs are actually layers of voices, 2, 3, or 4 voices, which can be used to actually make your sound richer, thicker, or fatter. Over here we have a group of voices in the, called the drawbars, and these are actually associated with the organs. The drawbar voices allows you, the end user, the capability of playing Audia as you would play an actual organ. Again, you have access to the actual drawbars, and these can be controlled with the sliders on the left-hand side, as noted below, right there. Watch the screen on your display as I move the sliders up and down. Nice organ luscious voices that you can use especially for a place of worship. Now we have different settings for drawbars over here, organ 1, organ 2 through 10, and watch as you select every different setting, the screen adjusts based on the preset of that particular setting. Loading external sounds into RAM. In other words, loading more of your own voices of your ethnic origin or background. The Audia provides internal memory which allows you to load your own voices or your own sounds as well. Some of these are already in your hard drive as we speak. Right here in the top, in the right hand section under the RAM, INS or Super Solo, is a button which is dedicated to your external sounds or external voices. And these are voices that you can load from your hard drive. When you press that button, your hard drive goes directly into the instruments folder. And you can see a whole bunch of voices in there. To load a voice, simply highlight the voice and select it, especially if you want to load more than one voice. You can continue with the selection by moving down to another line or another voice. Again, press user 5 of 10 to select it. And once you're done with your selections, simply press enter, and those are going to be loaded in F1 through F5 or F6 through F10. Once the voices are loaded, you can simply select them by pressing the RAM INS button and using F1 through F5 to play those new voices. Usually, depending on the size of the voices, it might take a couple of seconds to load a particular voice. Once a voice has been loaded in, a small asterisk is going to appear next to the voice to show you or to let you know that a particular voice has been loaded into memory. Now, in this same screen, you can also press the edit button to figure out what functions are dedicated to the RAM or Super Solo voices. F1 is clear and load. What that means is you can actually clear the entire machine right now by pressing F1, and that clears all the voices that have been loaded as we speak. Clear select means you can actually clear the selected voices. You might not want to clear all the voices. Maybe you want to clear just one or two of those voices. So you select the voice that you want to clear and hit F2 to clear it. Clear all simply means just simply wipe out the entire memory and start from scratch. And we'll discuss what save select does at a later time. Auto load is used to select a particular group of files which you want to be automatically loaded whenever you turn Audia on. These files are supposed to be the files with the particular extension RBK. And what's RBK? RBK is an actual file extension which is made up of either a couple of MSPs or a couple of init files, which are also in the hard drive. What these do is you can have, let's say, 5 or 6 voices. You combine those voices into a RBK file, and then you press the auto load on to turn that on that particular file. Let me explain this with an example. You go to the RAM INS for an example, and you press edit. Let's say you have a bunch of voices in here. Like in this case, we have a couple of some extra voices that were put in from Ajam Sonic. And these are packs. So you have a guitar pack, for an example. You also have organ packs. You have the synth voice packs. And you have a whole bunch of voices in here, which are bonus voices. So I select a voice like guitar pack.rbk. And then I turn the auto load function on. What that does is that whenever this keyboard turns on or powers on, it's going to automatically load the guitar pack or .rbk voice. This applies to all the other voices within the machine as well. Let's now dive into your program voices, which I intentionally left out before because there's a lot of things that go on with your program voices. These group of voices can be either made up of 1 voice, 2, or 3, or even 4 voices if you consider your second voice as well. And these can instantly be recalled at the push of a button. Now, depending on what you want to do, you might want to just edit a particular voice and save it as a program voice, or sometimes you might just want to use one voice and shape it up to your best or to how it sounds best to you and save that particular voice without necessarily building or layering. Let's try out some of the preset programs that come with Audia. With the program button on, I can now go into the piano category for an example, and I can try the grand piano and see what that sounds like. There's a sound in here called grand and pad for an example. Let's take a listen to this one. As you can see in this voice, it's made up of a grand piano and some luscious pads. In the string category, there's a very nice voice there called full orchestra, which is assigned to F5. Let's take a listen. Yeah. Now we're thinking Superman, right? If I go to page 2, there's another very interesting voice I'd like to give you an idea of, a timpani on orchestra. There we go. This can be used for movie tracks. In the choir section, we have some very nice, interesting things in there as well. Sacred choir, for example. In this particular case, as you notice, the bass is on the left side of the keyboard, and I have some nice scat voices to the right hand side of the keyboard. In the program section, you can actually split the keyboard up into 4 different split points, having different voices assigned to different split points. Programming voices, or layers of voices. In the Audia, one of the very powerful tools about the voice section is that you can actually program your own voices, or program your own program voices, or edit your own existing voices. And to do that, what you simply do is you select a voice, let's say for example piano, that you want to edit, and you can either press and hold a button. So in that case, for example, I want to edit the concert grand, press and hold the concert grand F1, and it tells me what the concert grand is made up of. You have 3 columns right there. The first column is your first voice, second column, second voice, third column is your third voice. Each of those voices have volumes for the independent voices, which is your next row, shift for slight tuning, octaves, tune for slight detuning, and pan, either to the left or to the right. And let's see how each of these work. I press F1 and it highlights the first voice. I can use the data wheel to change that voice. If the voice I'm looking for is not in the piano category, simply go to the voice button. Let's say, for example, press strings, and now I'm in the string category, and I can use the data wheel to turn through my different string voices. To select the next voice or second voice, press either F1 or F6. Go to the voice group where the voice resides, turn the wheel until you see the voice you're looking for. Each of these three voices have their own independent volumes, which can be selected for the second row, either F2 or F7. You can also shift each of these voices slightly out of tune, especially when you're dealing with brass section or brass voices. This is a very, very neat feature, since all woodwind instruments or brass instruments are not necessarily perfectly in tune. The tune column or the tune row does a slightly different version of what the shift does. It actually tunes the keyboard, but in semitones, semitunes. The next row is your pan, which allows you to send this particular voice either to the left or to the right. Now, as you can see, by user 1 on the bottom left hand of the screen, you actually have a function there called voice edit. If you want to edit a particular voice per se, you can select the voice using F1 and you can press the voice edit to edit that particular voice. And of course, you now have the different parameters that you can change or edit based on that particular voice. The LFO parameters can be accessed by pressing the F10 button as well to access the LFO parameters. To return to your program edit voice, simply press the user 1 button one more time. The second voice can be also programmed in this particular screen or in this menu. By pressing the user 2 button, it gives you the actual second voice that was assigned to this voice, which in this case was strings. Here you can control the actual second voice itself and the volume for the second voice, the octave value for that voice, the tune and the reverb, all for that second voice. Again, to return to the program edit menu, simply press the user 2 button one more time. The effects mode, which is user 3, allows you to determine what effects are assigned or applied to these particular voices. F2 gives you the reverb type, which is applied to all three voices at once. Effects assigned, which is F3 or F8, allows you to assign the independent effects to the voices. In the case where you actually have, for an example, more than one, each one, again, in this first case, F3, where you're now dealing with the different effects, distortion plus echo plus the chorus for the alto soft, voice 1. If I press F3, I'm dealing with the same effect status, but for the second voice. And this is the same for the third voice. The effects type below, which is the F4 or F9, actually controls or tells you what of these, in other words, which chorus. You have different chorus values. You also have different echo values, and you have different distortion values. User 4, effects send, allows you to apply a certain amount of effect to each of the three voices. So for an example, if I press F2, I can set the reverb for the first voice, second voice, third voice. I can set the chorus with F3 for the first voice. How much do I want the chorus for that first voice to be? And you can see in this case, they're all going up and down at the same time. So you can't really do this. These are not independent. The reason being that if I go back to user 3, we assigned an effect which actually ties all the three voices together as one. If I come over here, for an example, and pick a single effect, for example, echo in this case, chorus in this case, and in this case, echo as well, and I go back to the effect send, I can now adjust each one independently. The control, user 5, is a very powerful tool indeed, and a lot of things happen here which we're going to explain in a lot more detail. Pressing user 5 or user 10 takes you to the control page, and this is where you can actually control what voice plays where and how hard or how soft should you hit the keyboard before a particular voice sounds, or the sustain of the sustain pedal should be applied to what voice, or the volume pedal or the expression pedal should impact which voice. So again, as you notice, F1, F6, our voices are still above, and still you can see that the first voice we're dealing with is an alto soft, second voice is the baritone, and third is the blowed sax. The range, next column, tells you, okay, for the alto soft, which is voice 1, where do I want that voice to be heard on the keyboard? I want it to start, let's say, for an example, right here. You see the screen change, so E0 was selected as the first key, and automatically your selector goes to the next box. Where do you want that voice to end? I want that voice to end here. And the baritone, where do I want that baritone to start? I want it to start here. Where should it end? End here. Oh, and the blow sax, where should it start? It should start here. And where should it end? Put it all the way over here. To test this, come out of that range so that none of those are selected, and you can now hear it. Of course, the baritone is a little bit lower because we had so much effects applied to it on the previous page. So we can always go in there and take out the effects that we did apply to the baritone so that we can actually hear it. Now, the velocity, which is another tricky one, is this. 1 is the lowest value and 127 is the loudest or the highest value. The question here is, how hard should you hit the keyboard for this particular voice to sound? So if I say, for example, 1, and I put a number here as, let's say, for demonstration purposes, 60, when I play the keyboard soft up until about 60 in value, I'm going to hear the alto soft. The next voice, I can start that at 61. So if I play the keyboard a little bit harder, I'm going to hear this voice up until, let's say, about 100. And the next one, if I play the keyboard even harder, I'm going to hear this particular voice. Of course, now for that to be more effective, you want to go back into your range and zero them out so that you can actually hear all the voices on the entire board as well. Let's pick another sound here just to make it more obvious to us. Now, if I go to control page 2, I actually see on the display, as you can see as well on your monitors, a whole different set of controls. Again, remember, F1 through F6 is still for your voice selection. So at each time, you know exactly what voice you're dealing with. And you can change those voices at any given time. The portamento mono applies to the portamento switch button over here. When this button is turned on, do you want that to affect the first voice? And the second voice? And by how much? And the third voice? And by how much? You also have the poly or the mono. The poly, in other words, if I press more than one note at the same time, do I want to hear that particular note? Do I want to hear more than one note at the same time? Poly, yes. If I don't want the poly mode, I put mono. I can only press one note, or I can only hear one note at any given time, even if I press more than one note on the keyboard. The morphing control allows you to actually morph. In other words, if I put this as first and put this as second, if my modulation wheel is all the way in the bottom, that's going to be considered as my second voice. If I move it all the way to the top, it's my first voice. So I can actually go from voice 1 to voice 2 by simply moving the wheel. Modes, which is assigned or linked to F4, is pretty crazy and pretty interesting. A couple of things are going on here. Automatically, for example, you see harmony next to it. Now, these voices can be tied in so that when you select this particular voice, I instantly want the harmony button to come on. In other words, I want those notes to be harmonized based on what I play with my left hand. 3-voice layer means that all these 3 voices can be played together at one given time. Duet 1 and Duet 2 are the different duet modes for voice 1 and voice 2. And same for trio 1 and trio 2. Country Steel allows you to actually play 2 notes, and when you bend the pitch bend wheel, only the lowest note will bend. Morphing, again, we did that before, allows us to morph from one voice to another, and you can use the modulation wheel to achieve that. These are all different harmony functions or harmony parts which can be accessed by pressing the harmony button as well. Key off allows you to assign different voices and have those voices play when you release the key. This is very good for an example, and I'm going to show you an example here of where this feature was actually used. If I get out of this for a second, and we're going to go in and we're going to pick the saxophone called Jazz Contralto, and we're going to try and go into the edit mode and see what Ketron did here. The first voice is called the Jazz Alto. Second is called Sax Keys. What is Sax Keys? It's actually the noise or the sound made when you play a saxophone by opening and closing the different holes on the sax. So you can see here, if I go to the controller page, what did Ketron do? They actually assigned this particular voice to be heard only when the key is off. In other words, when you release your hand from the keyboard. Key on means when you press the keyboard. So in this case, when I press the keyboard, I'm going to hear the Jazz Alto. When I release the keyboard, I'm going to hear the keys. Just as I would hear an actual live saxophone player if you were to play the sax that particular way. Another interesting thing is on voice number 3, they have breath. And you all know that when you play an instrument like a saxophone, for example, at some point you have to breathe. Well, here we have key off time, which means there's a delay between when you release the keyboard and when you actually hear the breath voice or the breath sound. Let's play around with this for a second so you have an idea what I'm doing here. The breath noise you just heard, I'm going to adjust this and make it, let's say, a little bit louder so you can hear it more distinctively. And so too am I going to do with the key sax voice. Now listen to this. See that? When I release the keyboard, the saxophone player is actually breathing and preparing to play his next set of notes. This is very interesting and very powerful indeed, because not only do you now add more realism to your voices, which Ketron calls VCE, which is voice character emulation. Not only are you adding more character to your voices, but you're also able to express those voices better and make them sound even more real. Here, your harmony F9 can be assigned or applied to either the first voice or the second voice or the third voice when you press the harmony button. After on wheels, which is F10, is actually what controls are you going to assign to your pitch and your modulation wheel right here. So in other words, when you move these wheels, do you want this voice to be impacted by that? If no, select off. If yes, you can assign it to pitch 1 or pitch 2 or filter or amplitude. The aftertouch can be assigned, in other words, when you press the keyboard harder or when you press the keyboard softer, do you want the aftertouch to impact that particular voice? Modulation wheel and wah-wah. Pitch, filter, amplitude, cutoff. Or the bend, which is your pitch bend wheel right here. When you're done with the settings and you're okay with the way the program is and the way the voice sounds at this particular point, simply press the save button over here and you'll be taken to the screen. What the save is going to do is going to ask you, do you want to save? Of course you do. Save as, you can either keep it as a name that you have right now, or you can give it another name by using the keyboard, keybed right here. The backspace to erase the current name, and use the A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3 to give it a new name. You press the user 5 button to save into memory, or press user 4 to save this to disk for future use. aftertouch. The aftertouch, when activated, allows you to do certain things when you press the keyboard a little bit harder. For an example, if I go in and select the guitar and I pick the Strato, and as you notice, the aftertouch came on because that was actually programmed in the program section to come on with this particular voice. And this is what happens when the aftertouch, in other words, when you play and you press it a little bit harder. So in this case, the aftertouch has been assigned to a particular bend by a few degrees. Listen again. Portamento is very, very interesting indeed because it gives you some sort of a slide effect. And for this, I'm going to use like a very nice synth voice font here. With the portamento turned off, all I'm hearing is just the two notes that I'm actually playing. But with the portamento turned on, pretty interesting. The octave buttons over here on the side can be used to actually, like I said before, change the octave of the lead voice, or you can also change the octave of the second voice. Second voice, octave 2 down, up, 2 up, or constant. You can also change the octave of the lower voices. And to do this, you want to go into the Style View screen and select either lower 1 or lower 2. And while they're selected, you can change the corresponding octave. These voices, of course, can be heard when you play to the left of the split point. The transposer function is actually used to transpose the entire keyboard from a particular key to a particular key. So let's say, for an example, you love to play in the key of C, and the song you're about to play is in the key of D. What you simply do is you want to get from C to D, which is actually 2 half steps. So you're going to transpose the keyboard using the plus and minus over here, +1, +2. So by itself, you want to play, but you only know how to play. So I want to play this using this. So this transposed into right there. So now your keyboard is now in the key of D, even though you are playing, it's actually in the key of C. It's a nice little, we call it a little cheater. It allows you to play pretty much in any key. The rotor fast and slow is a unique function applied to the speed of the Leslie or the Leslie rotation in the organ voices. So when I select, for example, full fast or dark B3 sound, off, it's nothing, rotor slow, rotor fast, these two buttons together act as a MIDI reset. In other words, if you experience for any reason hanging notes, like a sustained note or something, rather than turning the whole entire machine off and waiting to come back on again, simply press both of these buttons together, and that turns off any notes that are being produced by the keyboard. This is the heart of the Audia keyboard. Its styles. For those not familiar with the meaning and the terminology, a style is simply a groove which is usually composed of what you would see or hear if you have a live band before you. That is drums, bass, and instruments, in this case arranged into chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 4, and chord 5. Look at your chords like your instrumentalists, like your saxophone player, your guitar player, and your, different players, different members of your band. As a matter of fact, for the more professional player, or for those who are going to use the Audia in the studio, you can look at your styles as some sort of a notepad for your music creation and for jotting down your ideas. Call it a music scratch pad, if you will. The arranger is actually used for arranging your music in your studio, or at your shows, or at your place of worship. You can use the arranger to create music entirely from styles, and that depends on how you actually make the arrangement. Hence the powerful arranger from Ketron. You can also use the arranger as a performer for performing live. Good example, as a one-man band, or as to use with a duo or with a trio, or depending on how you see fit. You can use an arranger at pubs, at hotels, lounges, nursing homes, bars, studios, or at home just to chit-chat with a couple of friends. For the point of view of a performer, this is very interesting as well, because a performer will pretty much use a keyboard, like say in a church, when playing with a choir. And you can, again, play by yourself or play with a bunch of other musicians as well. The interesting thing about this, though, is that how many times have one of you out there actually gone to, say, a show or gone for a rehearsal or choir practice and the bass player didn't show up, or the guitarist showed up but it wasn't in the mood? Well, enough talking. Let's see what the arranger can do and how this can kind of help you get through those lonely days. Selecting the style on the Audia is pretty simple. These are arranged in this section over here of the machine, styles. Now what that does is the styles are actually arranged into particular groups, like your ballads, your pop, your dance, your country, your Latin, and so on and so forth. To select the style, simply press the style button, and your style is going to show on your screen as you can see. Or you can press the F1 button from the main screen to go to your style page. This is also true for your voice page. Press F6 and it goes into your voice page instantly. You want to go to your second voice page, press F7. So your main screen can actually take you, it's like a shortcut that takes you instantly to whatever is being shown. Once you go into your voice category or your voice group, you can now look at F1 through F10, which are assigned or linked to your particular styles. Any style that has the big A in blue denotes that that particular style uses an audio track of some sort, either an audio bass, an audio drum, an audio guitar, or all three. This is what makes the Audia pretty much stand out from the rest of the arrangers out there. The fact that it actually sounds like a live band. The reason being that Audia uses these audio components, or audio drums, audio bass, audio guitar, to actually perform the music that you want to. Why? Because these parts were actually recorded by live artists or live studio artists, and live performers as well too. So the machine has been designed such that it captures not just the notes of the music, but the ambience and the aroma of actually playing. Let's pick a particular style here, for example. I'm going to go to the country, and I'm going to pick a particular style, let's say country surf. And I'm going to go to my right hand and pick some voices that I'm going to use with this particular style. So when I come into the guitar category, I want to use, next page, if I can't see what I'm looking for, I'm going to keep on going. Nice Telecaster. And when I go to the strings, I want to use a violin for an example. Now, with my split point on, because the pianist button is off, so I have, let's say in this case, violin to my right hand side and just my lower voices on my left hand side. And with this style, I'm going to give you a slight demonstration of what a style can do. Styles are broken down into different categories: variation A, variation B, variation C, variation D, intro 1, 2, 3, ending 1, 2, 3, and you have fill-in. Fill-in 1, fill-in 2, fill-in 3, fill-in 4, or you have break 1, break 2, break 3, or break 4. Now, you only see one fill-in button and one break because these are tied to the arranger. So if you're in arranger B, for an example, and you press the fill-in button, that's going to be fill-in 2. You press the break button, is break 2. If you're in D and you press the fill-in button, is break 4. Sorry, fill-in 4. Or you press the break button, is break 4. But thanks to our user programmable buttons at the bottom of the screen here, guess what? I can actually have dedicated fill-in 1, 2, 3, and 4 buttons right there. Or dedicated break 1, 2, 3, and 4 buttons right there. Key start means that when you press a key to the left of the split point, you want the arranger to start. Otherwise, it won't start. And I'm going to define and describe to you what key start and key stop together do, or key stop by itself. But let's take a look at what a style can do. Let's take a listen to this country surf style for a second. I'm going to put key start on. I want this style to start with an arrangement, with an introduction. In other words, bring me into the song. Introduction number 1 is normally short and just 1 or 2 bars long. Intro number 2 is normally a little bit longer and there's no variation in the intro. Intro 3 is the longest and has more variation. Same applies to the ending. Ending 1, straight to the point, end. Ending 2, maybe a little bit longer, but it's only in one key. Ending 3, there's some variation involved in ending 3. So as you can see, pretty much by playing a style and playing the chords on my left hand, I can control exactly what the style is doing while I play the lead parts on my right hand. Certain functions that can be used by the style includes functions like your count in. And your count in and pause do a couple of things, and restart too. Normally when you're on stage with a drummer, for example, you normally hear the drummer do 1, 2, 3 with the drumsticks, right? Well, guess what? My count in can be used to do exactly that as well too. My count in can also be used when the arranger is playing as a restart. Sometimes you ever notice how you're playing with a singer and they're all over the place and you're trying to follow them or try to restart or try to figure out where they're at? Well, if the style is playing and they're too far ahead of me, I can always do that, count in and bring the style back to the beginning. This button also acts as the pause button when playing a MIDI file or playing a wave. Sometimes also it's not easy to tell exactly what the tempo of a particular style can be. So if I pick a style, let's say I pick a ballad, for an example, and I have no idea what this tempo is going to be, I can use the tap function right here to actually tell the arranger what the tempo should be. So if I do this, that's your tap right there. Now, some of the styles you notice, for example, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to pick a style that has a certain interesting feature tied onto it. Let's see. The riff, here we go, Dominicana. This is an R right next to it. It's the riff mode. What the riff mode does is that, as you can notice, you have arranger A, B, C, and D, and there's a little riff below that. When you're playing in this arrangers and going from A to B to C, RDA is pretty much taking a grasp of what you can do. It's learning how your progressions are, what you're doing with the chords and everything. When you go into D, it plays a melodic riff line, which is along the lines of what you played, and also along the lines of the style of music you're selecting. And this allows you to simply play your lead parts freely. Let's take a listen to some of this. So as you can see, when I'm in riff mode, the machine pretty much just takes over. Now, Notice how we spoke about this key start and key stop a little bit earlier on? Key start allows you to start the machine by playing a chord to the left-hand side. Key stop and key start together mean that when you play, RDS is going to play, and when you let go of the keyboard, RDS stops playing. Key stop by itself, if you press a chord and you release after a certain length of time, RDS keeps on playing for you. But if you press and release immediately, RDS will stop. Again,